I'm 1 minute early. I'm going to do it again. What up, everyone, from all the different social media and YouTube pages from which you have tuned in to this amazing and brilliant Climate Hub meeting. My name is Mitch Silverstein. I have the honor of being your MC/moderator tonight. During the day, I serve as Surfrider Foundation San Diego County's chapter manager, but tonight I have the additional honor of representing the Climate Hub. And I've got a slide up because the next question is probably, well, what's the San Diego Climate Hub? And this is what the Climate Hub is. It's located in Hillcrest at the University Christian Church, and it brings together San Diego-based organizations to expand and accelerate our collective efforts to achieve the transformational and equitable policy and infrastructure changes required to stop the immediate and dire threat of the climate crisis. And all of the organizations' logos that you see on the bottom there, all of us have our offices at the Climate Hub in Hillcrest. All right, removing that screen. Sorry, I'm also doing the tech here. Yeah, and it's a great spot. You know, along with the church itself, a preschool, and a rooftop full of solar panels. All of our offices are there, and a very bright future in becoming a true community hub for climate action, environmental justice, and hopefully daytime dance parties as well as things continue to open up again. Before we dive into our four brilliant panel presenters, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that our chapter and the Climate Hub does operate on the unceded lands of the Kumeyaay people, who are the original inhabitants and protectors of this land and coastline and are still here today. The Climate Hub and all of its member orgs are fully invested in the cause of justice, equity, and inclusivity in everything we do, and acknowledging whose land we're on is a very small part of that equation. With that said, we are going to get into our presentations without any hesitation. Tonight's kind of focus is water and the climate crisis, and we've got a cool, 4 different presentations going over different areas. Starting off, we have Lucero Sanchez from San Diego Coastkeeper. She's the community policy coordinator there. I am going to bring her into this live stream. Hey, Lucero.
Hello.
You ready to rock?
I am.
Cool. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch, for the intro. Well, welcome, everybody. And again, San Diego Coastkeeper is a member organization of the San Diego Climate Hub. So I want to thank the San Diego Climate Hub for letting us take over this chapter meeting to talk a little bit about our water future and just the correlations between the climate crisis and water. So just a reminder, anybody who's watching on Facebook, on YouTube, anywhere you're watching this, if you put any comments in the chat on those platforms, we'll be able to see them for our panel later. So go ahead and type out any questions you have, and we'll make sure to address them later in the night. Awesome. So I will get into it. And first slide here, I do just want to touch on climate change and more extreme weather patterns. So we're going to have a lot of periods of drought, as we're seeing now. We're starting that now, as well as a lot of years where we're going to have heavy rainfall and a lot of flooding. So that's what we're seeing at that bottom right picture. We know Mission Valley always floods, but there's areas all throughout San Diego County, all throughout California. So those are huge issues that I wanted to make sure that we address initially. Something to point out is that the water in San Diego is generally imported from Northern California and the Colorado River, which are both areas that are going to also be experiencing these droughts. And just to point out, 19% of the state's energy use is based for water transport and use. So as the climate impacts grow, it'll be a growing measure of that water supply vulnerability without us having local control or local supply. So I do want to point out that's not very climate resilient. So I'm going to get into stormwater infrastructure, which San Diego Coastkeeper does a lot, and we're moving forward with getting some changes there. So I'm going to go into stormwater infrastructure. Stormwater infrastructure, a huge part of this is urbanization. Again, we're not anti-development by any means, but it's clearly something that affects water on multiple levels. So we want to make sure that we're talking about it and accounting for it. As we have more development, we'll have more concrete surfaces, more buildings, more streets, and all of that is replacing our natural ground cover. When it rains, the water would seep through into our groundwater reserves, and it wouldn't really flow. It wouldn't really have any erosion to it. But because it's concrete now, everything has a really increased flow rate and just moves along, which is why we have stormwater drains to make sure that we're staying safe and that we don't have flash floods or anything like that. But those impervious surfaces means there's going to be more stormwater volume, changes in peak flows, more pollutants going into our water, as well as faster water flow means there's going to be a lot more erosion, much more change in creek morphology, and a lot more pollutant loading into our water. So that's something to consider. San Diego County actually has about 11 watersheds. Through those 11 watersheds, all of them lead to the Pacific Ocean. So when we talk about any pollution in those areas, we're going to be talking about it going into our Pacific Ocean. So let's look at what that looks like. Stormwater pollution. It's a lot. Here in that picture on the left, you see Choice Creek in San Diego Bay. There's a lot of pollutants that you see there, a lot of single-use plastics, and a lot of things that you can't see, a lot of metals, a lot of nutrient loading, industrial runoff, agricultural pollution. And then you see some pictures on the right, also from that Choice Creek area. You can kind of see the oils in that area or just the trash. All of this, like I said, is making its way into our ocean systems. And as we have those higher flood years, we're just going to have more of that. At the bottom, those two pictures are something that we're all quite familiar with as San Diegans. We all know that once it rains for the next 72 hours, we really shouldn't be going into the water for public health risks. So you see at the bottom right, that was taken in November, and none of the beaches in San Diego County were safe to swim in. And this isn't just when it rains, this is an issue. Some of the beaches are closed for a significant number of days out of the year because of pollutants, because of wastewater pollution, which we'll get to in a second. Imperial Beach, I think half of the year was closed last year for public health risks. So these are all things that our infrastructure is contributing to, as well as just pollution. So we want to make sure that we're talking about this. And I'll get into a little bit more as to why it's related to climate change in a second here. But I do just want to give us a little background and a little basis. So wastewater pollution. We just talked about stormwater pollution, which is our rainwater. Our wastewater is the things that we are flushing down the toilet, down the sink, in industrial areas and residential areas. So all of that wastewater, all of that sewer water is going to go into a wastewater treatment plant. You can see that picture on the left is a great little graphic showing the kind of system that we use, where our wastewater is separate from our stormwater. They're two different pipes. Our wastewater does get filtered and taken back into the ocean. Our stormwater pollution and stormwater drain doesn't go through that treatment plant. It just goes into the ocean because the only benefit to having those is to avoid that flooding. The problem is that we have a lot of aging infrastructure. A lot of this hasn't been updated due to funding and due to other issues. So these two pipelines, which color match to the picture on the right there, blue being stormwater and yellow being wastewater, they generally run side by side with each other. So when you have aging pipes that are exfiltrating into each other, it means our wastewater, which has human fecal bacteria, end up going into our oceans without being filtered or treated, which is why we have those health risks when we're going into the ocean. And you'll see some signs that say like sewage contaminated water. You'll see it with the like permanent postings. So these are all issues that we have in San Diego and in California in terms of this kind of thing. So let's go into more specifically. I'm going to pick on the city of San Diego just a little bit because they actually have really good graphics for this, showing some of their pipe failures and issues and water quality. The city of San Diego is currently looking to move forward on addressing these things, but they've acknowledged that there is a huge funding gap and there are a lot of pollutants in our water, which is only going to get worse through aging infrastructure, through droughts and flooding and climate change as well. So these are things to keep in mind. I know this is a huge picture with a bunch of points here, but I won't take too long. These are on the city website as well. So how do we fix all of these issues? As we start to move forward, we want to try and treat stormwater as, instead of a liability, as an asset. There are multi-benefit solutions that will address that water quality concern, flooding, and disproportionate impacts. A lot of these areas are going to be areas that are communities of color, low-income communities. So that's something to consider as well. And the way we do that is by increasing stormwater capture, increasing green infrastructure. Both of these things, as well as just updating our aging infrastructure, are going to create those green jobs, workforce development, and allow us to move forward with projects that are going to be much more water efficient and much more climate resilient, and make sure that we're adapting as we go. So what that looks like here, green infrastructure, this is what it looks like. I think it looks beautiful. We have green streets, creek restoration, artificial wetlands, native plants instead of non-native plants in areas to make sure that we're using our water more efficiently. So you can see here on the right, that's also a picture from the city of San Diego. They are thinking of up these things, but they are going to need a lot of funding for it, which we'll talk about in a sec. But really the main thing that I want to touch on is stormwater capture. When we talk about all of the pollution that stormwater can cause or pick up and move into our stormwater drains and into the ocean, instead of doing that, we could really capture this water and create a local water supply for ourselves. Stormwater can actually provide up to 22% of the city's water supply and could save the city up to $750 million over the next 20 years. That's an incredible number to point out there. In addition to our pure water system, which is a wastewater recycling system, which that system is actually projected to potentially provide up to 50%. So that 50% plus that 22% means that we're going to start being a lot more sustainable in our water supply, as well as we're actually lowering our water use year after year. It's something that we're seeing across San Diego County. So we might not completely be off of imported water, but it could really turn the tables on that. So some examples here are some pictures. On the right, we have more smaller scale. We can have cisterns where they capture rainwater, and you can use that for irrigation. On the right, I believe that stormwater capture is in LA. They've had a really successful measure in the past to increase their stormwater fees to be able to pay for this because they had a lot of issues like we did. The picture on the bottom right is actually really close to home. That's the San Diego airport. They're using their stormwater capture for their HVAC system. So it makes it, again, a little more sustainable, and there's not that runoff that we would be seeing from that airport. So these are all really great opportunities that we have here. Obviously, these are really great solutions, but what's stopping us from fixing our aging infrastructure, getting stormwater capture and more climate resilient solutions is really funding shortfalls. The city currently charges less than any other major Western city at 95 cents. You can see that on your water bill. All other cities in the Western United States that are major cities charge Like Del Mar, for example, charges $13. San Francisco charges $21. So those are some things that have led to why we have a $1.4 billion shortfall. That is a B, not an M. So if you see that picture on the right, that's our priority gap for the city of San Diego. Again, this probably looks very similar to other cities in San Diego County. The city of San Diego is just currently actively looking into this. So we always hear about like streets and potholes and things like that, but they really pale into comparison with stormwater. And I do want to point out with this picture, stormwater is not including any other kind of like the wastewater, the pure water. So it's a huge portion that we really have to make sure that we point out. One way to fix this and one way to get involved is the city of San Diego is starting to move forward on a potential ballot measure. If anyone is interested in getting involved, you'll probably hear about it through the San Diego Climate Hub. You can also look more into it through San Diego sdcoastkeeper.org. So we're trying to get people to get ready for July, later in the year in January, and potentially a November 22 ballot measure on increasing that stormwater fee so that we can move forward with climate resilience. So definitely do that. It's also, it polls high. That's the other point on there. So we have a really good shot, but we need to make sure that this keeps moving forward for all of our water future and climate future. So that is all on stormwater. I do also was going to have some slides on the regional conveyance system, but we actually just released a short video on that. So I'm going to go ahead and let Mitch share that. I'm happy to answer any questions during our panel, or if you have any questions in the comments, we'll get to that later. But thank you so much again. Mitch, roll the video.
They're gonna tunnel through our mountains, ruin the desert for no new water. So the regional conveyance system, the RCS, is a proposal for over 100 miles of tunnels, pipes, pump stations, and even a desalination plant to move water from Eastern California and the Colorado River over to urban San Diego. County Water Authority has wanted to have some independent, self-owned conveyance system from the Colorado River. Right now, they're utilizing the Metropolitan Water District's conveyance system. So really, in essence, this project is a redundant pipeline. The County Water Authority is betting that this project would save ratepayers money 60 years from now. But in reality, an unbiased study by member agencies shows that it'll actually cost more money for us down the road. Yeah, I mean, the environmental impacts of this would be devastating. They're talking about tunneling through Borrego, through the Cuyamaca Mountains, building pump stations, tunnels, canals. It's basically unimaginable what they're talking about doing to our backcountry, our protected backcountry here in San Diego. And then with that, it brings with it, compared to the existing pipeline, a 40% increase in energy demands for this pipeline. So we're talking about a desalination plant, which is incredibly energy intense. We're talking about more fossil fuels. We're talking about more greenhouse gases and accelerating and exacerbating climate change. Right now, the County Water Authority is in their second phase of studying this project. Later this year or early next year, it will come up for one more vote. That vote is going to be pivotal as to whether this project actually gets built or not. Sign up for our email lists, our alerts. Speak up for our backcountry. Speak up for our oceans. Speak up for our waterways, that there are better solutions in our region. Join us in the fight against this pipeline. Stop the boondoggle!
Awesome video. Always good to see Matt O'Malley getting down on a megaphone. Oh, I should bring Lucero back in one sec. Thank you, Lucero, for that awesome presentation. We'll talk more during the panel after all the presentations. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Danielle Dolan from the Local Government Commission. I'm going to bring up your slideshow and let you take it away. Thanks so much for being here with us tonight.
Perfect. Thank you, Mitch. And that video was not only entertaining, but a really great segue, because I'm going to speak with all of you this evening about Borrego Springs, which is one of the locations that the Water Authority is proposing to send that pipeline through. But I should introduce myself. My name is Danielle Dolan. As Mitch said, I'm the Water Program Director for Local Government Commission. And for those of you who have not heard of the Local Government Commission before, we're a nonprofit organization based in Sacramento that's been operating in California for nearly 40 years now. Our 40th anniversary is next year. And we help local governments to increase their community resilience and livability. We do so by connecting leaders, advancing policy, and implementing solutions at the local level as well as at the statewide level. My daughter's phone is ringing. If you'll excuse me for one moment. Gotta say, that's the first time that's ever happened to me in a presentation. Where was I? LGC, we have 4 key program areas that we work in: climate, energy, water, and community design. We also run an AmeriCorps program called Civic Spark, which places recent college graduates in local public agencies across the state to help build capacity and advance community resilience goals. So if any of you watching are a college student or a recent college graduate or have children who are going to be graduating soon, please visit lgc.org or civicspark.lgc.org to find out more about that program. Now, let's get into Borrego Springs. If you could type into the chat whether or not you've ever heard of Borrego Springs or been to Borrego Springs, I'd love to know. It is right in your backyard or in the back country of San Diego County. Here is a map for you. The red blotch in the top right-hand corner of the county is the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, and Borrego Springs is in the center of that park. It's an unincorporated community way out in the backcountry, northeastern San Diego County. And it's very remote, very rural, but it's an incredibly unique community. It's full of natural wonders and colorful history. It's a destination with peaceful resorts and art galleries, endangered species, wildflowers, and golf courses. It's a very special place with something for everyone. And anyone who visits there falls in love, myself included, which is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing there now. Not only is it full of natural wonders, it's also a diverse community woven together with a rich social and cultural fabric. Some residents were born and raised in the desert, others came to visit and never left. A lot of them are self-proclaimed desert rats. The population is roughly 1/3 Latinx and 2/3 white. There's a very strong sense of place in Borrego Springs and deep loyalties, even among its part-time residents. So Borrego is a very seasonal community. They have about 3,000 year-round residents, and that almost doubles during the cooler months of October to May. But Borrego Springs is under considerable threat from the climate crisis. The 3 biggest threats to Borrego Springs come in climate impacts to water, to public health, and to the economy. I'll go into each one of these briefly. First of all, water, my favorite subject. Lucero mentioned earlier that San Diego County imports 80% of its water. Well, that's not true for Borrego Springs. Borrego is actually 100% dependent on groundwater, which accumulated over millions of years. The map you see on the right is a map of the Borrego groundwater basin. And now their groundwater basin is in critical overdraft, which means they're taking too much water out of the aquifer and not recharging it fast enough to sustain their community. So under new state laws, they're required to bring their basin back into sustainability so that water flowing in is equal to water they're pumping out. And they have to do that within the next 20 years. In order to reach sustainability, the community and its economy have to learn to survive with 75% less water, while at the same time, climate change is reducing the meager rainfall that has historically fallen in the area and that supports both the local ecosystems and recharges their groundwater. At the same time, as Lucero mentioned, climate change is making summers longer and hotter, which will increase water demand for cooling, for refrigeration, and for outdoor use. Next up is public health. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the public health impacts of climate change. Extreme heat adds pressure not only to local ecosystems and crops, but also to vulnerable populations, especially children and the elderly, which make up the majority of Borrego's population. Borrego Springs also has a large population of low-income community members who may not be able to afford air conditioning to combat those high temperatures. And many of these lower-income residents work outside in the agricultural or service industries, increasing their exposure to those heat stresses. The high temperatures also dry out the desert soils, and the region's high winds lift those dust particles into the air, causing respiratory problems. Borrego Springs already has a disproportionately high rate of childhood asthma, which will only worsen due to increased heat. It's downwind north of the Salton Sea. So whenever the Salton Sea is having critical air quality issues, all of the dust particles that come up into the air around the Salton Sea are blown into Borrego Springs. And last but certainly not least is the economy. Borrego's economy is completely reliant on agriculture and recreation. In the middle of the desert, they're relying on agriculture to support their community. And the recreation is mostly golf. So climate impacts will significantly impact both of these sectors. Agriculture, the picture in the top left is Sealy Farms. They're famous for their red grapefruit. They also grow herbs and other citrus in Borrego Springs. About 80% of the community's water use is for agriculture and about 50% of their economy. The increased temperatures from climate change are going to make it harder to grow crops. They're already making it harder to grow crops and requiring more water to keep those crops alive. It's also impacting the agricultural workers who are out in the fields during those high temperatures. The Anza Borrego Desert State Park, which I mentioned, the crowning jewel of the state park system, they like to say, draws thousands of visitors and therefore revenue to the community during the cooler months. But as temperatures continue to rise and water becomes more scarce, the ecosystems that recreators come to see may be impacted, and fewer visitors will likely be willing to brave those extreme conditions to come see the beautiful desert landscape. And as I mentioned, a lot of that recreation is actually golf. There are, I believe, 6 golf courses currently in Borrego Springs. The same stressors impacting Borrego's groundwater supply, ag industry, and natural ecosystems are also threatening the golf industry. So it's inevitable that some of the courses will have to go. But don't forget that these industries are what provide jobs to the community. Any changes to ag, golf, or tourism will have a direct impact on the most at-risk community members. So what is the community doing about this? I mentioned earlier that Borrego Springs is an unincorporated community. That means they don't have a city council or a planning commission to go to with their concerns, and they have no local authority for their own decision-making. Borrego Springs is subject to San Diego County jurisdiction, but as you all know, the county is very large, it's very diverse. Most of the voting population and the economic drivers are closer to the coast. So historically, Borrego has been left out in the dust by the county. So recognizing the significant challenges that we're facing them, community members joined together and relied on their tight social fabric to leverage their limited resources and seek creative solutions to their challenges. They have a strong history of community organizing. One of the organizations that has risen up from the community is the Borrego Valley Stewardship Council. They stepped up to organize the community in the face of climate change and their water use reductions. They had already worked together to establish a vision for Borrego as a world-class gateway community to highlight the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, and decided to expand their interests to address the water issues as well. The only public agencies in Borrego Springs, which are the Water District, the School District, and the State Park, are all members and actively engaged in the Stewardship Council. The county is not a member, but it does pay attention to what the Stewardship Council is doing and has told us that it values their work, and in upcoming general plan updates, they will listen to anything the Stewardship Council has to say. One thing the Stewardship Council realized early on was that they could not tackle these issues alone. So they brought in local government commission to help. Initially, they asked us to help with their groundwater sustainability planning, specifically in response to that 75% water use reduction that I mentioned, and also to help with community engagement to their disadvantaged community members. But the GSP, the groundwater sustainability process, is really tied to all the other issues the community is facing and the viability of the community as a whole. So we introduced the concept of water and land use integration as a community resilience strategy. LGC takes a socio-ecological systems approach to all of its work. That's a mouthful, socio-ecological systems. So we are strong proponents of integrated watershed planning. Integrated planning addresses multiple needs or challenges with a single action or project. It's cost-effective and time-efficient. It's more reflective of community needs and visions, and it creates stronger working relationships with peers across different sectors, and I believe results in a richer experience for all. So when you look at things from an integrated socio-ecological perspective, you're looking at both the human side and the natural side. So we worked with the Stewardship Council to expand its community reach, broaden the attention beyond groundwater and land use to incorporate public health, ecosystem protection, economic development, cultural heritage preservation, climate resilience, and more. We're also helping to guide the community in collaborative governance or self-governance to fill the gap of the lack of jurisdiction within the region. We've helped the Stewardship Council secure a number of grants to support their work, currently funded under the San Diego Foundation, and we're helping to both to build capacity for the Stewardship Council and local residents, to align integrated planning, and to do local advocacy work. So we've applied for funds on behalf of the Stewardship Council and are teaching the Stewardship Council members and other residents how to apply for those funds on their own, and trying to establish them as a formal organization. So currently they're just an ad hoc coalition. We're on the process of creating a 501c3 and building their bylaws and structures and voting processes so that they can then take the mantle and lead the organization on their own. For integrated planning, we are coordinating between the sponsor group, which is the local body that coordinates with the county on general plan updates. We're also coordinating with Supervisor Desmond, who is doing some revitalization efforts in the region. And we're coordinating with the Water Master Board, which is the new structure that's going to be managing their groundwater aquifer. And in regard to local advocacy, we're supporting their efforts to fight the regional conveyance system that Lucero mentioned and was highlighted in that fabulous video. We are advocating for adequate representation in both the general plan update and to get their fair share of resources from county, state, and federal funding. Two other projects I want to highlight real quick that are connected to Borrego Springs, but also connected back to all of you and closer to the coastline. We are working with Citizens Coordinate for Century 3, or C3, which is a group of local activists who have been working to address planning issues in San Diego for 60 years, 20 years longer than LGC. And we'll be convening 6 regional knowledge action networks, or CONs, that will be comprising local experts from across different disciplines to collaboratively craft solutions to the region's interconnected climate and public health challenges, looking at everything from architecture and design to equity to ecological sustainability. Now my children are home. Going to be a little noisy, I apologize for that. We're also working with the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative and the Resilient Cities Catalyst to conduct a coastal resilience needs assessment, establishing Coastal Resilience Project Accelerator, and building a coalition of coastal resilience ambassadors. I'm hoping some of you on this call today would be interested in serving on a CON or participating as a coastal resilience ambassador, or maybe you have your own ideas for projects that can be implemented through the accelerator. Both of these projects are just starting to get off the ground now. And we're hoping to tie all of these projects together. Borrego Springs will be represented in C3's Backcountry Con, and the Coastal Con will integrate with the Coastal Resilience Ambassadors process. And perhaps some of the work shared by Lucero and Kristin, who's coming up next, can also be integrated with the work we're already doing. Just like local Borregans, you too can have an impact on your local community and ensure San Diego is resilient in the face of climate change. Get involved, volunteer, join a local coalition, go to public meetings, speak up, share your voice. Please reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about our work in Borrego Springs with the Knowledge Action Networks or the Coastal Resilience Project. And in the meantime, I look forward to your questions during the panel discussion.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great questions. You know, me being Surfrider, we're a Surfrider guy. We're always looking west towards the ocean. So it's really nice to hear about some stuff going on to the east upstream. So thanks for that. We will see you shortly after the other two presentations. Didn't mean to cut her off like that. Hey, Laura.
Hi.
You're up. You're my coworker. Nice to see you. I'm going to bring up your presentation. Everyone, this is Laura Walsh. She is also a Surfrider San Diego employee, policy coordinator. Take it away.
Yeah, coworker and neighbor, he forgot to mention. Super excited to be here with all the climate activists, climate enthusiasts today. Crazy to be following Danielle's presentation. Seems like LGC has quite the challenge on their hands. And I remember working on a water report a couple of years ago where we interviewed people in East County about some of their water challenges. And they told us that in times of drought, they anticipated a continued reliance on emergency imports of bottled water, which I just thought, wow, this is a really big challenge on our hands when it comes to water. So LGC is doing great work. I'm here representing Surfrider Foundation, and Mitch, you can go to the next slide. Surfrider is a grassroots, oh, I'm doing the slide, sorry. Let's see, how do I go next? One second. Surfrider is an activist organization. We're powered by a grassroots network of volunteers who all want to get out there and protect our ocean, waves, and beaches. And we started working on sea level rise after working in a lot of different, in the clean water space. You've probably heard our name with regards to plastic pollution and border sewage. We started working on sea level rise under the realization that we can't protect something that doesn't exist. And that's kind of the existential threat that sea level rise poses to some of our beaches. But I hope I can convince everyone today that we do have time to adapt to a changing beach landscape. So these are some graphics that I borrowed from Mark Merrifield, who's the director of the Center for Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation at Scripps Oceanography. I think they do a really good job of illustrating what we can expect when it comes to sea level rise, which of course is a regional climate impact that all of our regional planners are looking at, if they're on the coast at least. And this graph on the left, it shows what sea level rise will look like as a function of different climate scenarios. So sea level rise will be a function of how well as a global community we curb our greenhouse gas emissions. For people following this conversation, we're not doing so hot, if you will, but one way or another, even if we curbed all our emissions today, we will see some amount of sea level rise. So in San Diego, over the past 100 years, we've seen about 10 inches of rise. By 2100, we'll see 1 to 4 feet from the year 2019. And that 1 to 4 feet, for those who are new to the sea level rise conversation, refers to a vertical amount of sea level rise. So that manifests itself locally very differently in different places. In particular, there are a lot of concerns around how sea level rise combined with storm surge and high tide events will impact flooding and what assets are at risk from flooding. So you can see this graphic on the right shows that high tide flooding days will begin to increase significantly in 2030. Again, we're looking at curves where you know, we are currently in the space where we have time to prepare for some of these climate impacts on the coast. And if we don't prepare, we're looking at pretty disastrous scenarios. And yeah, the final comment on that right graphic is that by 2100, every day we'll see a flooding event that would categorize the day as a flooding day. Surfrider, our beach preservation committee goes out every year. Let me stop this video and ask Mitch to play a video. Our beach preservation committee has really wanted to communicate what sea level rise will look like in San Diego. It's obviously a little bit scary, a little bit challenging to envision how sea level rise will affect, you know, the beach and coastal access and all the uses that we have on the beach. So we've been sending out volunteers to document king tide days. So those days that can really be a proxy for what our coast will look like under a baseline level of higher seas. So Mitch, can you play the video and we'll just watch it for about a minute? Okay, I think I'm back. Well, that video is wild. Every time I watch it, Yeah, it kind of stops me in my tracks. I think these videos, and thanks to Stephanie Lee and Eric and our Beach Press team for putting that awesome video together. But I think what it illustrates really well is two things. Is on a bunch of those early shots where you see the comparison when people are using the beach and then not using the beach, you see like all these different types of uses of the beach. You know, people are fishing, people are playing volleyball, people are surfing, walking around. All of those uses go away when the beach is gone. And the other thing I think about is the beach is an asset, right? Like for all those reasons, and intrinsically and economically, the beach is an asset. And right now, as cities start planning for sea level rise, they have to identify what assets are vulnerable. And a typical management construct is better at considering things like public infrastructure and private property and physical tangible assets that are at risk. And something Surfrider really tries to do is to get decision makers to think of the beach as an asset. It's right there. It's the first thing in the way of rising seas, and it's the first thing we'll lose, as you can see in those videos. So that gets me into some of our advocacy. Let me run us to the next slide. One thing I want to point out is there's a bunch of strategies to manage sea level rise. We have like a suite of options that planners are really picking from right now. And here in this image, you can see some of the options that people in the past have chosen. There's a lot of development. This is La Jolla Shores, and there was a lot of development very close to the edge of the beach, close to the sea after a period of low storm activity. In the 1900s, and then the 70s came with really strong storm surge, and people started putting up seawalls. And this is called hard armoring. It's an engineered structure built to protect development, in this case, built to protect private property, as with in most cases that we see seawalls. And this little image that you see within the bigger image, I think is really crazy. It's when these storms came in the 70s, people actually brought junkyard cars to the beach in the hopes that the cars would provide some measure of flood protection benefits for the homes there. Instead, the cars were smashed to pieces, smashed all over the beach. And I think my point with including these pictures is that we're better now. We're smarter now. We know the seas are rising significantly. We're not just going to have a freak period of high storm activity. We're going to have a very different baseline level of higher seas. And thankfully, we have many coastal access and beach preservation policies that prevent us from doing things like moving the junkyard onto the beach to protect private property. So these are the three kind of broad categories for coastal adaptation. So like I said, cities right now are really in the phase of studying how their community is vulnerable to sea level rise. And then they're looking at their assets and thinking about what they want to protect and how to protect it. And those strategies are a really active area of focus for organizations like ours that want to make sure that things like the beach are considered in adaptation strategies. So on the left, we have the protect category. A city can choose to protect an asset like a home, like we see in the left picture. So there's some trade-offs here. This wall is clearly providing flood protection benefits for the house behind it. But what do we lose? This seawall in front of the house is taking up beach space. It's refracting waves differently than the beach would, and it's actually pushing waves back to the coast in a way that accelerates erosion. So it's perpetuating the need for more seawalls, and it's eroding the beach quicker in a context where sea level rise is already narrowing our beaches. So hopefully you're getting from my tone and explanation that Surfrider opposes hard armoring as a form of coastal adaptation because of the trade-offs to public trust resource like the beach. This middle picture, I think, illustrates accommodation of the coast. You can see that this house gets to stay where it is and have this beautiful prime real estate, but it doesn't look like this home is going to last forever, and there's probably some structural concerns about the longevity of this home. But we also see that natural coastal dynamics have been preserved, erosion has been allowed to happen. So in a scenario where maybe there's a greater ecosystem, lagoon ecosystem behind this house, that might be really important to preserve, or if there's other development, that kind of the trade-offs there might be considered. This third image is me acting as an advocate, because I think this is a beautiful, idyllic image of retreat where we have let natural coastal processes play out. We've made space for the beach so that as sea levels rise, we see erosion and we see beaches continue to exist here in the highly developed Southern California. Of course, the trade-off, if you are a homeowner that owned property on this spot, this probably doesn't look like a super idyllic picture to you because you're not there anymore. So that's where we get into managed retreat. And this is basically a policy that we advocate for when it comes to adapting to sea level rise. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We are not trying to move development away from the coast overnight, but we are trying to acknowledge, as you can see in this photo, which I think is Sunset Cliffs, we can't ignore the reality that sea level rise is coming right up to our doorstep, right up to our roads, to our private property, to our public infrastructure, our lifeguard towers, our stormwater systems, wastewater treatment plants, power plants. Like, the seas are rising. And if we wanted to keep the beach, we would have to make space for it. You can't just dump sand into a bathtub forever. So I'm quoting here Hassan, the director of our Metropolitan Planning Organization, at the top of the slide. You can fight nature, but nature will always win. Sandag, much to our support, has publicly and recently committed to relocating a section of track off of the coastal bluffs in Del Mar, which is a really big deal. For anyone who's walked the beach in Del Mar lately, there's 2 miles of track that when there's a bluff collapse is sometimes within feet of the beach. And I get texts, I get comments all the time from people who are about to get on the train in the low sand corridor going on the Amtrak or Surfliner and just saying, am I good to ride the train? And yeah, I wouldn't fear monger right now, but it's just very, very clear that that train is not going to last forever, and it's got to be moved inland. And it's going to be a huge project that involves many different jurisdictions and public agencies and federal and state dollars. But we're very happy to see public agencies here beginning to acknowledge that sea level rise and erosion are coming, and we can't fight them forever. So we're really hoping that the relocation of the low sand corridor in Del Mar, so the Del Mar realignment, will be a really a hopeful case study of when managed retreat works and makes good sense for a community. We also advocate for phased in managed retreat in a way. Again, we have a super developed coastline, and for many, many years, regulators and decision makers have known that sea level rise is coming. That's been public information, even if a sense of emergency is emerging now. And we've tried to phase in a lot of development standards and practices to acknowledge that one day we'll have to make space for the coast. And those standards, those policies we advocate for, they can get a little wonky, but they have very real consequences, as Kristin Brinner's presentation is going to show us next. She leads our Beach Preservation Committee. But some of the things we advocate for are bluff top setbacks. If you're building at the top of the bluffs in Solana Beach, where in parts of that community there's no beach in the winter, erosion is about to accelerate really quickly when the ocean is lapping at that bluff consistently. So we're advocating, and we have been advocating for bluff top setbacks. So policies that just mandate that you build your house a certain distance away from the edge of the bluff so that it's safe, and so that you preclude the future need to try to stabilize the bluff with those hard armoring solutions that we talked about earlier, which can have really detrimental impacts to the public beach. So we also advocate for limiting of hard armoring and hard structures, again, for all the reasons I've mentioned. Some ways we do that are advocating for mitigation fees, so that if you're going to put up a seawall that has huge consequences for the public beach, then the public should be compensated with money that can go towards strategies to hopefully restoring the beach and restoring coastal access that is lost in the process of putting up that armoring. And then in general, there's also bigger, you know, visionary concepts where manage retreat makes a lot of sense. And one of the reasons why manage retreat is just kind of like, in my eyes, an evolving and more exciting concept now that a lot of climate change information is out there and a lot of people and planners and cities are having to react to climate information, is because in the past, planners really think on 20 to 30-year timelines. And if you guys remember that sea level rise graph that I showed at the beginning of my presentation, in 20 to 30 years, we see a disaster scenario. But right now, it can still be a little bit hard for people to imagine the vast consequences of, you know, losing their beaches and flooding from sea level rise and all the other impacts we've talked about. And so if we really are able to step back from our limited planning windows and limited decision-making windows, we can think about, again, more creative ways to address making space for the coastline. So one area where we've gotten involved in this type of conversation is up in Carlsbad. There's an 11-acre property pretty close to the coast, but not on the coastline, with a land use that is disputed by members of the community. So it's currently undeveloped. And very close to it is the South Carlsbad State Beach Campground, a campground that's super valued by the community and which the city of Carlsbad has studied and shown that it's highly, highly vulnerable to sea level rise. So if we were just thinking practically and creatively, this upland area, this 11-acre site, is a really great place to relocate the campground. And in some ways, that's a theoretical idea, but it's also really practical if we're able to, again, expand our vision for planning beyond a short timeline. And if we really want to save those beach assets that we all find really valuable. And then I'll just address the photo in this is not actually Carlsbad. This is Los Penasquitos Lagoon. The section of Torrey Pines that was in the King Tide video is right around this area too. And where Los Penasquitos Lagoon Foundation is recognizing that its parking lot is really vulnerable to sea level rise, and there's a lot of high priority coastal uses in this area. So people use the parking lot, people use that major road, people surf here, a lot of people walk these beaches. There's a major lagoon. Like all of these are really like valuable assets. And so if they're going to make any changes to the parking lots, they want to make sure that they work with the community to really determine like what trade-offs are most important. And so they've launched a stakeholder outreach process to try to determine how they should reconfigure this parking lot. And it's another great example of how managed retreat can be super inclusive of a community and acknowledge some of the impacts that we'll have if we just simply do nothing. And I think that wraps it up for my sea level rise talk. Again, happy to answer any other questions at the end, and I'm very excited to be passing the mic on to Kristin Brinner.
Thank you, Laura. That was amazing. We're going to bring in one of your besties, Kristin, volunteer leader of our Beach Preservation Committee. Let me get your presentation up, Kristin. Looks like you might want to put it in like present mode.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. So yeah, thank you, Laura. Laura and I work together on a lot of beach preservation related issues. I am the co-lead along with Jim Jaffe, who I believe is watching on Facebook. So thank you, Jim, of the Beach Preservation Committee of the San Diego chapter of the Surfrider Foundation. And Laura gave a really great intro to what we think is an important adaptation strategy in managed retreat. And I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of a case study of where we think this is really important in Solana Beach. And so this is a home that's on the bluffs at 245 Pacific Ave. Here's a picture of a seawall being constructed right next door. And at a recent Coastal Commission meeting in 2019, one of the commissioners said that this is a poster child for managed retreat. And we could not agree more. So I was going to give a little bit of background on the Coastal Act first before I dive into the specifics of this project, because if you don't understand at least some basics of the Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission, then I don't think this is going to make so much sense. When the Coastal Act was enacted in 1976, it essentially drew a line in the proverbial sand that homes that existed before the Coastal Act would be allowed seawalls and other protection until the end of that home's economic life, whereas homes built after the Coastal Act should really be on notice that new development, homes that were built after the Coastal Act, could in no way require the construction of protective devices. And that's codified in the code of the state. It says, here's a section 30253, which we are constantly quoting, that new development can in no way require the construction of protective devices. This date, 1976, and this fact is important when we start looking at all the shenanigans that happen up and down our coastline with really terrible bluff top development and are exemplified in the worst possible way by the home at 245 Pacific Ave in Solana Beach. So 245 Pacific Ave, this is a little bit of the permit history of the home. There was a pre-Coastal Act home that existed there, but in 1996, the homeowners wanted to build a new home there. And basically, if you rip down a pre-coastal home and build a new one, you lose that protection that you can get, shoreline protection. So they wanted to build this new home 25 feet from the edge of an actively eroding bluff in Solana Beach. So in order to get the permits to build the home, the Coastal Commission, which is the body which is charged with carrying out and enforcing the Coastal Act, essentially gave those homeowners a choice. The first option was to set the home back 40 feet from the bluff edge in a location that would have a higher likelihood to be safe for 75 years for bluff erosion. And 75 years is kind of typically what is considered to be the economic life of a home. And the second option that the Coastal Commission gave the homeowners was to go ahead, set your home 25 feet back from the bluff's edge, and because you are building this in an unsafe location, you have to agree to the following conditions: that you would waive all rights to construct any bluff stabilization devices to protect any portion of the residence located within 40 feet of the bluff top setback, and that you'd have to record a deed restriction, which is just like a legal written promise acknowledging that there's this, you can never have a seawall, and that the portion of the home that's endangered should be removed in event that it is endangered. And the homeowners in 1996 decided they wanted to build their home 25 feet from the bluff's edge, so they accepted the long-term consequences of that decision. However, it didn't last very long. Despite this deed restriction, their promise that they would remove the home if endangered, that they could never build a seawall. In 2001, less than 5 years after they made this promise, they were applying for protection of their home in the form of a sea cape infill. And this was actually permitted. That actually was allowed per the restrictions. And then in 2014, they applied for a full-on seawall, and they were denied because the deed restriction was very clear there. So the homeowners at 245 Pacific Ave have tried to get more clever in order to break the promises they made, that they promised never to build a seawall and to remove the threatened portion of their homes. So they worked with the neighbors, the neighbors to the north and the south at 241 and 249 Pacific Ave. Those people have pre-Coastal Act homes, so they have the right to build seawalls. So they kind of all got together, 241, 249, to say that not only do 241 and 249 need seawalls in front of their house, a gap in the seawall in front of 245 would endanger the homes at 249. And it was pretty disingenuous in our opinion that they were saying that this seawall in front of 245 Pacific Ave isn't to protect 245 Pacific Ave. Even though on this application, they admitted that their home was incredibly unsafe. And there's a lot of kind of technical jargon here. But you can see that basically at 20 feet, they're saying that it's very likely, 20 feet from the bluff's edge, it's highly likely that the bluff is going to collapse up to this point. And that there's another possibility that the bluff could collapse 40 feet in, so 20 feet into the house. So even though 245 is clearly unsafe, they're saying this seawall is not to protect 245 Pacific Ave. And this just really was very upsetting to me, because if you look at the beaches in Solana Beach, and here I have kind of a picture of the northern portion of the city starting at 475 Pacific Ave. You can see it's continuous seawalls all the way to 249, 241, and 235 Pacific Ave, and then there's a little seawall, and then there's a gap. And so this is like one of the last remaining natural bluffs in the northern portion of the city. So luckily, the Coastal Commission decided not to play along with these games, and while they granted seawalls in front of 241 and 249, which were pre-coastal homes, there wasn't really anything we could do about that, they denied the seawall in front of 245 Pacific Ave. And I just wanted to play, it's a 2-minute clip of some of the comments the Coastal Commission had on this. If Mitch, you want to go ahead and play that?
Irresponsible development, reckless development gets rewarded at the cost of the public's right to a beach, to protection of the beach. And I think that the analogy of it's going to get ugly, and it's going to have to get ugly. We all wish it wouldn't, but it is.
But I do believe we're at an inflection point when it comes to the question of seawalls. And I have struggled with this. Here was a property owner who chose to redevelop their property, who accepted a condition, specific condition, to waive armoring in order to really send a message that the commission is serious about seawalls, that we're serious about what happens when you choose to waive this requirement and you choose to locate your house beyond what we have indicated to you we thought was a safe place to build. How do we then act responsibly? For me, I'm very saddened but resolved that we must take a stand on seawalls.
But it seems obvious that this would not be something we are at a kind of an inflection point, and maybe, the policy is to just stop approving these, period, until somebody decides to get a grip on what the policy for strategic retreat should be or what we're going to do.
That if we are going to be consistent and we put on new construction that they can't have a seawall, then they can't have a seawall. And so then what you do is you say to the other two sides, you can have a seawall because the law allows it, but we can't guarantee what's going to happen to it. We're not in the guarantee business.
Okay, I'm assuming I am back. So this is a picture of the construction of the seawalls in front of the neighboring houses, and like you can see I've outlined in blue 245 Pacific Ave. They were not given a seawall, so this is the bluff destruction in the form of seawall construction in 2020. And then here is now the 50-foot gap in front of this home right now. So then in 2021, in 2020, 241 and 249, so these are the neighbors to the north and south, they came back and said, nope, it's not good enough for us to have our seawalls. This gap, in the seawall in front of 245 Pacific Ave, is endangering our home. However, the interesting thing on this permit application, 245 wasn't even included on the permits. So you can kind of see the games that these people play. Luckily, the Coastal Commission stayed strong and saw through these games. They pretty much said, we're not going to allow a seawall in front of a home that isn't even part of the application, but would directly benefit from the construction of that seawall. So the last thing I want to note is that next, these wealthy blufftop homeowners do what they always tend to do. They sued the Coastal Commission, and at this point, the lawsuit has been put on hold, and all the homes, 241, 245, and 249, have applied again for a seawall in front of 245, purportedly just to protect 241 and 249. Despite the fact that 245 is clearly in danger from their own geotechnical studies, their own documents they have cited, and will be the primary beneficiary of the seawall in front of the home. So this permit application will actually be heard next month at the June Coastal Commission meeting. And so this is why this has been particularly difficult for us, because we saw that there was a deed restriction on this home. And often when the Coastal Commission is granting permits for blufftop development, there's a couple things they can do to try and offset the negative impacts. So they can typically charge sand mitigation and beach recreation fees in the forms of, you're building a seawall, you're narrowing the beach, you're occupying public beach space, you are preventing sand from getting to the beach. So they charge fees. However, we think these fees are way undervalued because like a typical, I think the proposed mitigation fee for 245 Pacific Ave is about $140,000 over the 20-year permit lifetime. So if you do the math, that works out to about $583 a month. So compare that, they're getting a seawall for $583 a month. They're renting public beach space and occupying it with their private seawall, and compare that to what they're charging at their neighbor's house as an Airbnb, which is $1,450 a night. So that math does not really compute in our heads. Another tool that the Coastal Commission usually uses were deed restrictions, when they're saying, okay, we're going to let you build whatever it is you want to build on the bluff, but you need to accept these conditions that you can't build a seawall, et cetera, et cetera. However, we're seeing that people can work together in very clever ways to try and get around those deed restrictions. And even worse, the city of Solana Beach has refused. We've specifically asked them about this multiple times, and they're on the record as refusing to enforce the deed restriction. As they say, it's a coastal commission restriction and not up to the city to enforce. So it looks like deed restrictions aren't really a great tool either. And the last thing I want to bring up is the redevelopment triggers. And this is how they permitted even the seawalls in front of 241 and 249. They said you can have your seawall, you have a pre-coastal home, you have a right to a seawall. However, you can only do so much maintenance on your home. If you renovate your home more than 50%, then basically you've converted a pre-coastal home to a new home, and you've lost that privilege of having your seawall. So most permits are conditioned that once the pre-coastal home has passed this 50% redevelopment threshold, it should trigger the removal of the seawall. But we've seen that even this isn't sufficient. So this is 475 Pacific Ave in Solana Beach. It is a pre-coastal home. This was in July 2015. The house is endangered, so they got the seawall. And then in 2018, there was a lot of construction activity. This is a under 50% redevelopment of the home. So you can see clearly they ripped it down to the studs, and this is the home now. So this is a pre-coastal home, and I'm putting quotes around that has the right to a seawall, but it doesn't really look like a pre-coastal home. It kind of defies logic. So kind of this is all coming back to the fact that manage retreat is really one of the few tools that we have left if we don't have, the seawalls cause the beaches to narrow, sand mitigation fees are too low, deed restrictions are proving ineffective, people can redevelop their houses. So I just wanted to close with this monument that's at Fletcher Cove in Solana Beach, just memorializing the fact that the park and the ocean shore they belong to the public. They were donated to the public by Ed Fletcher. And I always think it's ironic because this looks like a gravestone to me, and I feel like what these homes are doing in the forms of seawalls is really the death of the beaches in Solana Beach. And we understand a lot of these arguments that we're making are based in principles, but these principles are grounded in the California Constitution and the Coastal Act. And we can't look at any of these things in isolation. The broader implications of all of this development needs to be considered, and we can't stand silently as our beaches are dying death by 1,000 cuts, as we've seen in Solana Beach. So that's my uplifting close to this presentation, but this project will be heard at the June Coastal Commission meeting, so we plan to provide comments and hopefully provide some context around why we oppose this project.
Thank you, Kristin. That was amazing. I like the ending it with a tombstone. Cool. Well, I'm bringing y'all back into the thing. We're gonna keep it that background of a nice Borrego Springs flower, super bloom.
Super bloom.
And get into some questions that people had. I'm gonna try something and see if it works here. Oh, it worked, I think. So question from Mickey. This is while you were talking, Lucero. Mickey collaborates with a number of groups in LA working on implementing low impact development as a solution to stormwater pollution and groundwater depletion. Haven't heard of anyone in SD working on this. It's an exciting solution in that it reduces both stormwater pollution and recharges ground aquifers. Any comment on that? I guess it's not necessarily a question. It's more like you should check this out, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a couple comments on it. I'm really glad to see LA doing that, and that doesn't come as any surprise. In 2018, they ran a successful ballot measure, which we're trying to learn from and utilize for our 2022 ballot measure, hopefully. Hopefully the city of San Diego moves forward with that. There are certain examples of low impact development in San Diego, and in longer presentations, usually I highlight more of those retention projects, like parks that are meant to flood when it's raining because no one's playing in the park when it's raining, to help through those mitigations and through just adding more green infrastructure. So there are some, but it really comes down to funding again. It's not that the city of San Diego or any of the cities in San Diego County haven't really considered or want to do that. It's generally like they're putting Band-Aids on aging infrastructure and they don't really have the funding currently to move forward with climate resilient solutions like that.
Funding. All right. This one from our friend Allie, Surfrider volunteer, Coastkeeper employee, environmental superstar. What parts of the city are most vulnerable to infrastructure failures? Again,
Yeah.
it's in your presentation, Lucero.
Yeah, thanks, Allie, for the question. I think this is a really important part to bring up is the cities and the areas of the city that are most vulnerable are generally areas that have been marginalized in the past, that are low-income communities, communities of color, and just all of those areas that we saw, like Choice Creek. They're all the same areas that you can see in like green access maps or just like socioeconomic levels for different areas of the city. They're going to be about the same in terms of where there are flooding issues, where there are more aging infrastructure issues, where there's a lot more pollution, not just in water related things, but in air quality and things like that. So if you look up like San Diego Green Access Map, there's a great map that shows different areas, and it's the places that you would think of. It's not the really affluent coastal areas as much for the infrastructure failures.
Sadly, not shocking that it's
Gotta get environmental justice and equity, man.
Totally. A couple of questions that came through for Lucero. Laura, you could maybe chime in here too, because it's about water quality. Why should we be worried about bad water quality, and is there a time of year that it's especially bad?
Yeah, we should be extremely worried about water quality for multiple reasons. Closer to home, it's because when we're swimming in our waters, we absolutely do not want to get sick from the water we're swimming in. Like I mentioned in our slides, a lot of wastewater finds its way into our beaches. So there are things like E. coli that can absolutely make you sick if you're ingesting that or just swimming in it, as well as just our marine protected areas and just the environmental degradation that all of that pollution has. We can't really do any kind of like mussel farming or things like that because of all of the pollution. People that subsistence fish generally have guides as to how many fish you can or cannot eat because of the bioaccumulation for a lot of these pollutants. So they're huge issues that we definitely need to focus on. And in terms of timing, generally after rain, you're going to see a lot more pollutant loadings, but there are a lot of different businesses and different industrial areas that pollute year-round, as well as just the sewer pollution that generally comes from like the Tijuana River Valley. Those are generally year-round.
Awesome. Last question for Lucero. You're part of your presentation. Will people really vote for a stormwater tax?
I hope so. I think so. In my slide, I pointed out in 2020, we were actually able to release a question with the San Diego Progressive Labor Alliance poll that asked whether people would be interested in an increase in a stormwater fee. Obviously, our water fees are already incredibly high, and as we touched on with RCS, that would only get higher. But this is something that we do definitely need, and with just a little bit of information, which is where we all come in terms of making sure everybody is aware of the water quality issues. That initial poll, I think it was about 64% said they would support an increase, as well as 14% were undecided. So clean water, rightfully so, polls probably the highest in terms of issues throughout San Diego. And as we run educational campaigns and make sure that we're talking to our friends and family, we can definitely get there. But just to remind people, if the city does a ballot measure, they're going to be looking at needing 66% of the vote, not just 50% plus one. So we definitely do need to make sure that we're pushing on this, making sure that we're on top of it, and making sure that we get some clean water for everyone.
Wow, thanks. Moving on to some questions for Danielle. I do want to give a quick shout out to Suzanne Till on the comment stream, just mentioning how dependent we are on the Colorado River, and that the Colorado River is at the height of its own 20-year drought. So just adding credence to the reality that we need to pay more for stormwater. we need stormwater capture and wastewater capture to supply our water needs. So thanks for those. Danielle, so Anza Borrego, how important are local decisions versus state decisions for Borrego Springs or Anza Borrego?
It's a great question. Local decisions definitely have a more direct impact on the community, especially decisions that are made at the county level. Decisions that are made on behalf of San Diego County are generally designed to benefit the majority of San Diego County, and Borrego Springs does not fit that mold. So many of the decisions, many of the policies that are put in place have a negative impact on Borrego Springs. State policies do still impact Borrego. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is the most poignant example, but it takes a while for that to trickle down to the local level, and Borrego isn't impacted any more so from that legislation than any other area is impacted, whereas county decisions are going to have a very significant impact.
Follow-up question that actually is kind of just popping into my head, because you did make note a few times that Borrego Springs is unincorporated, meaning it's not a city and it's more under county supervision. Is there any history to why that is? You know, is incorporation something that could benefit that township or unincorporated community, or is it better the way it is, or are there, if you know anything about that, I'm curious.
Yeah, they're actually too small to incorporate. I don't remember offhand what the threshold is for population in order to even be eligible for incorporation. That would go through the LAFCO, the local agency formation commission. But they have looked into that, and the natural resources they have available cannot support the population that would be required to incorporate.
Got it. Good to know. And then regarding your organization, or the organization you work for, Local Government Commission, how does a community like Borrego Springs get to work with you?
Anyone can reach out to us directly. The way Borrego Springs found us was through their groundwater work. We co-facilitate the statewide NGO Groundwater Collaborative, and they attended one of our collaborative events, asked who was doing local work on integrating water and land use, who could provide local technical assistance besides the big giant consulting firms that charge $200 an hour. And I said, well, we do, and I don't really know anybody else that's doing it. So we exchanged contact information and started working together. And Borrego has a way of getting into your blood, and they've sucked me in, and now they've sucked my whole team in, and we love it. And I don't think we'll ever stop working with Borregans.
Yay. Awesome. Thanks, Danielle. I'm going to pop up a question from Brad Krim. I believe this was sort of more Laura, Kristin, kind of during your presentations, probably while Laura was showing a video of how all of our beaches are disappearing. Has anyone been looking into artificial reefs to mitigate harsher surge and wave forces while also enhancing / restoring natural areas?
I can partially answer that. I'm sure Laura also knows more than me, but I know there have been some artificial reefs that people have built. I don't think many of them have been particularly successful in that the forces that the ocean exerts are so strong that I know a lot of them have ended up washing up on shore. And then I know in Solana Beach, they were actually looking at one in Fletcher Cove. And basically they found that in order for it to minimize the impacts of the waves action on the bluffs, the reef would have to actually stick up above the water. So clearly it would not be contributing to surfing resources, but in fact be destroying surfing resources and be incredibly ugly at the same time. So I don't know if there have been many great examples of where it has worked.
Yeah, I know Oceanside is looking at one as it's looking into different alternatives for keeping sand in the area. And yeah, I think Kristin nailed it. And the only thing I would add is that in general, Surfrider likes, quote, natural adaptation strategies, preserving what we have, protecting natural systems that are very good at adaptation and don't come with the negative trade-offs that a lot of engineered solutions come with, which is a little bit of jargon speak for saying ocean dynamics are really complicated, and if you dump an artificial reef in the ocean, you don't really know how that will affect the resources that are already there. So why make that trade-off?
And I just wanted to tag team on what Laura said. It just made me realize that the bluffs are the natural adaptation option for the ocean. They naturally erode. So if the water's coming in, the bluffs should be able to move back, which is what they have been doing, I think, for 10,000 years in San Diego. So there might be a point where there needs to be some equilibration, but the bluffs should take care of the fact that the water gets higher. It should equilibrate to give you the beach back again. And that's really the problem with when you fix the back of the beach with the seawall, you prevent that process from happening, so the beaches can't maintain that equilibrium.
Awesome. Question for Laura. What other strategies do we have for protecting the beach?
The question on everyone's minds. Yeah, I think like I just said, there's some natural adaptation strategies, the best of which I think involves, preservation of what we already have. For instance, like, natural beaches are very good at responding to storm surge, and like Kristin said, maintaining sand on their own and all of that. But we can also work very actively to preserve natural ecosystems. Surfrider is part of the Rewild Mission Bay campaign, which is all about restoring a section of wetlands that would be very absorptive of wave energy. That will be more of a concern under sea level rise. But then we get, all the solutions that people come up with that can be a little more simple and come with trade-offs, like dumping sand on the beach, which is called beach nourishment. In some instances, people have trucked in sand from the desert. Someone was talking to me about, the way, sometimes we just pick up sand and move it. If we're dredging a harbor and clearing sand in a certain area, we pick it up and put it on the beach. So there are sort of the categories of human-induced engineered strategies and natural strategies. And we definitely tend to support the natural protective restoration strategies first.
Thank you.
The Dune Project in Cardiff. If anyone's walked in Cardiff recently, there's a great Living Shorelines Dune Project that, it provides a lot of flood protection benefits to the freeway and businesses behind it. And it also includes like habitat for birds that are foraging. And it has some plants that, could theoretically sequester carbon or just support less erosion of the dunes themselves and maintains that beach. So that's kind of a tangible example.
Also reminds me, you remind me of what's going on at Fletcher Cove, maybe still, but it was a couple of weeks ago. I drove by and there was the opportunistic sand replenishment where there's a big construction going on. And so they're just going to take that dirt and drop it on the beach. We get a lot of emails and calls about that, people thinking it's something crazy, but actually we kind of support that, but not wholeheartedly. Is that?
I mean, as long as they're checking to make sure that it's good beach quality sand and it's appropriately placed and it's, there's a lot of consideration. It's a small amount of sand. It's just going to kind of spread out and generally contribute to the sand supply. So, yeah.
Got it. Mm-hmm. All right. Switching gears a little bit from Hamid. You're looking for a job. Good on you. Is there any available position for someone who is interested to work on climate change impacts and adaptation on water projects? If anyone anyone can go for that.
If you're a recent college graduate, we'd love to have you apply for the Civic Spark program. If you are not a recent college graduate, I'd love to see your resume anyways for potential upcoming job openings. But I also saw some messages in the chat about running for election on a local water board, and I strongly encourage that as well.
Cool. You can email me. I get all these, a lot of us who work in the nonprofit sector, we get all the emails that kind of aggregate job opportunities and stuff. So, happy to share those. And then, of course, I always say, I kind of got a job in this through being a volunteer for many years. So I think volunteering is even, in my opinion, is even better than an internship if you're kind of a new up and comer to this. Just getting in where you fit in and gaining experience that way.
To add to that real quick. Oh, sorry.
Don't worry, go ahead. We'll get
to add to that real quick, San Diego Coastkeeper doesn't have any current job openings, but we do have volunteer positions if anyone is interested. If you're potentially interested in that, or if anyone else that's listening, we're opening up a advocacy volunteer workshop series for anybody who's interested in that and learning about Advocacy 101 and learning about how to support issues that we're all working on, that Climate Hub is working on, and just get plugged in that way.
Cool. And, you know, we actually, Surfrider San Diego is hiring. It's a part-time position, kind of almost perfect for maybe someone who's in college or a recent graduate, or someone who's okay with a part-time job, which is a beach cleanup coordinator. So yeah, that's I think that application's open until I think Monday, or the application period. All right, Sheila Ott, how are communities of concern being engaged on the infrastructure issues that disproportionately impact them?
That's a great question. Currently, the city of San Diego is in part of their phase where they're doing a lot of polling, they're doing some surveys, and they're reaching out, holding future workshops that actually San Diego Coastkeeper is working on, potentially setting up some green infrastructure webinars with them to make sure that we're reaching out to communities of concern and for them to have questions. We're hoping to do one in Spanish for communities of color that speak Spanish. So we are definitely engaging. The Choice Creek Coalition is a great way. They're also doing a lot of work and just making sure that they're having those resources as well. But we should all really be moving forward and making sure that we have language accessible, mobility accessible webinars and presentations and workshops and all of that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it makes me think of kind of the old guard of environmental nonprofits and stuff, maybe doing too much work kind of on behalf of communities, but not necessarily talking with the communities and working with the communities to work together. So really collaboration is where it's at for the Climate Hub orgs, at least.
And if I may add, local governments themselves that are responsible for doing this outreach, they're also very much under capacity or over capacity, don't have the skills or the resources they need to do really effective community engagement. So we've seen a lot of success when they partner with community-based organizations or NGOs in the region that can help make that connection for them, as well as providing the capacity to those underrepresented groups so that they know how best to engage and represent their own needs and interests to the decision makers.
Awesome, thank you. Question from Cecilia, and Cecilia, if you're still on, you can hit me up in the comment if I'm wrong, but I think this was kind of during more of the sea level rise and the beach loss part presentation. So yeah, do you foresee information like this making its way into environmental education, whether it be in the traditional outdoor experiences or in the classroom? Great question, I think.
Yes, I mean, I think in general, Surfrider and Coastkeeper and LGC work with a bunch of other climate interested NGOs and activists, and definitely young people are central to that conversation. I know we work with like Sunrise Movement, and members of the Green New Deal also have like a good youth presence. So I would say yes. And also just, I mean, people love, anyone who uses the beach knows that people love to tell you about their observations. And I think we're all our firsthand observations of the beach are gonna change a lot over the next couple decades, and people will need an explanation for that. So there's also just more, I mean, there's been scientific information for a long time, but kind of like I showed in that one graphic, sea level rise is a climate impact that depends on global greenhouse gas emissions. And we're getting a much clearer picture of what that looks like now. So I think the climate science is more there, the climate impact science is more there, and we'll just start seeing changes.
Yeah, I actually wanted to add on to this one a little bit as well. It was an exciting question because San Diego Coastkeeper does do classroom visits. We have educators who generally partner with the city of San Diego, but do other cities and schools in the county. But this one particularly through Project Swell, if any teachers are interested, they will go into generally K-6 classes and do interactive workshops through Zoom. We've made a lot of different virtual resources for that, but really it's basic, like what's climate change, what's watershed, and it's matched to curriculum of the certain grades. There are also outdoor experiences with tours, virtual tours. So if anyone is interested in that, please go to our website for that.
Great answers. Great question. I mean, obviously, environmental education in this country is in a sad state, I would say. You know, we're all products of the school system. So, you know, I didn't learn any of this stuff. I learned I learned to don't litter, throw it away, or throw it in the recycling bin, and that was it. Question from Carrie Marie. Do you know of any project to collect and filter non-point source pollution before it goes into the ocean?
I've seen different projects. I can't point out any specific ones. If anyone else can, please go ahead. But really the idea is that because we're not doing that, which would require some maintenance on those, we can start to move forward with capturing the water instead of just filtering it and letting it go to the ocean, but making it a local water supply. So that's kind of where we're moving forward with stormwater capture projects, hopefully.
I would jump in here too. I think Lucero is working on this, so thinking about really big city or regional level projects, but the buzzwords like you might be looking for are just green infrastructure pilot projects, because, you know, technically implementing natural projects all throughout a city, you know, just like a bioswale, like, you know, lining a street with some grass and some different soil and different plants can capture pollutants that come from the road and filter water. So there's like lots of little examples of green infrastructure being implemented, and then some like, yeah, bigger, cooler examples of green infrastructure. I'm trying to think of like specific ones, but like green roofs are kind of like an example of a project that you're like using the space you have to capture water and filter it and provide some other co-benefits. So those could be something to Google if those are like the types of projects you're interested in.
Yeah, and I think there's a, you know, kind of a growing, vibrant kind of startup culture around some of these stormwater problems too. I know that there's a couple people in San Diego who are working on stuff. They haven't been able to share it yet because of patents and stuff like that, but there definitely are people working on kind of like extra little filters and stuff like that to just help get some of at least like these large, you know, plastic pollution and other, you know, solid things from going into the water. I think that's obviously harder with you know, very small things for chemicals. Let's get a question. Where to go here? For Kristin and for Laura, I guess too. Okay, I can't find it. The question was from Allie, and it was basically regarding Kristin's your slides about the 50%. Sorry, I can't even talk anymore. But hey, how do they measure a 50%, whether the redevelopment of a house is more than 50% of the original house or not?
So because this is what I do for Surfrider, I happen to have Solana Beach's local coastal program at my fingertips. And so it's defined as alteration of 50% or more of major structural elements, including exterior walls, floor and roof structure, and foundation, or a 50% increase in floor area. So even that definition, it gives me pause when you looked at those pictures. It really looked like it was more than 50% of that stuff getting replaced. When we saw this happening, we started like talking to the city and be like, is anyone inspecting this? Are they doing what they said they were going to do? And Solana Beach is really not that responsive to our concerns about this kind of thing usually. So they were like, oh, here's the building inspection card. And that was kind of all we got from them. I mean, when they applied for the permit, they basically had to list out what it was going to be to replace and the calculation, and it was like 49.7%. Clearly, if that is the case, then the definition is maybe flawed of redevelopment, or I mean, it gets pretty technical, but yeah, they've figured out how to work with it and get themselves new homes pretty clearly.
Seems like a lot of working around the system is going on. That seemed to be a theme of your presentation.
Yeah.
Question from Emily Field. Do marine protected areas on the coastline provide more regulation and therefore restricting armoring on that coastline?
Not that I know of. I've never heard an MPA cited to prevent armoring. And I mean, I think because they're out in the ocean and the armoring is happening like above the high tide line, essentially, I don't know that there would be a nexus between those two. I don't know, Laura, have you heard of that?
Well, no. Well, MPAs protect biodiversity, so I think it might be a little bit indirect to call shoreline armoring an impact to biodiversity, although it could be that there's all sorts of things living in the sand. I think in general, having some sort of protection status, which MPAs are, is like good for advocacy when you're trying to protect like natural places. But yeah, I don't know if it's been used specifically for armory.
Great question. Got a question from Gina. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Do you need support with Arab-speaking communities? And then I'm going to just throw up her other comment too, so we know exactly what she's referring to, or he's referring to. I'm referencing the stormwater measure and community volunteer support.
I had muted myself. Yes, definitely. Please reach out or put your email in the chat, or email us, Lucero at SD Coastkeeper, and we can really help. What we need is hands on deck and volunteers and people that are interested in reaching out and helping us with that. So absolutely.
Awesome. And then I have one last question for Kristin, more on a personal level. As a volunteer, how are you able to be so involved in this complicated topic?
I'm muted. That question is from you, Mitch, right? It's a big time commitment, but I live in the community and it's super important. And when I hear the projections that the beaches could potentially be gone in 15 years, so before my daughter is even in college, it's terrifying. And I live here because I go to the beach and I want there to be a beach to go to. So it's an existential threat to my lifestyle and everyone's lifestyle in San Diego and California. So, I mean, even though I happen to live closer to the beach than maybe some people do, I'm lucky. I live like 5 blocks away. The beaches are for everyone in the whole state, and they belong to all of us. So the fact that the beaches are being taken for the protection of private property, public beaches, is just so wrong on so many levels.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I think we'll end it on Suzanne Till's comment. Fabulous job. So excited to see so many fabulous women taking on climate change and water. Beanies off to all of you. That was great. It looks like there are some of the commenters did want to reach out to you. So Lucero just put her email in the chat. Maybe if we can all put our emails in the chat real quick, just so people know who to reach out to. I'll put mine in there. I know Kristin's by heart. You mind if I put yours in there, Kristin? And Laura's? And then Danielle, what's your email?
Yeah, I don't have access to the comments. It's ddolan@lgc.org.
This is just a work call now.
There we go.
Okay. Well, with that, hey, so excited that you all presented for this meeting. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks everyone for watching. Great comments, great questions. Let's keep it moving, keep it going. Pedal to the metal. Climate crisis is here, and we're on it. Thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.